Imagine opening a gift from a friend, wrapped perfectly, tied with a delicate ribbon, and smelling faintly of fresh pastries. But as the days pass, an unbearable stench seeps from the box, and when you finally open it, what you find inside is something no human being should ever witness. This is the unsettling true story of Carmen Marin, a talented chef with a terrifying secret, and the seemingly innocent gift that hid a horror so grotesque it would haunt an entire neighborhood forever. If you're fascinated by cold cases, secret files, unsolved disappearances, and supernatural phenomena, you've just found your new favorite channel. Subscribe now, turn on notifications to never miss a new video, and share with others. Don't forget to hit the like button. It helps us create even better content every day. It all began on an ordinary spring afternoon in northern Spain. The sun cast soft golden rays over the quiet streets as Mary, a middle-aged woman, prepared dinner in her modest kitchen. The comforting aroma of chopped vegetables filled the air as she moved through her usual routine. But her peaceful day was abruptly interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. Wiping her hands on a towel, she made her way to the front door, curious about the unexpected visitor. When she opened it, there stood her neighbor, Carmen Marin. Carmen was known around the neighborhood for her warm smile and exceptional culinary skills, particularly her famous croquettes, crispy on the outside, rich and flavorful on the inside. She was holding a large, neatly wrapped gift box tied with a bright ribbon, and on top of it, balanced on a tray, were some of her renowned croquettes. Mary smiled politely, inviting her in. But Carmen didn't step forward. Instead, she lingered on the doorstep, her hands trembling slightly as she extended the gift. Up close, something seemed off. Carmen's eyes, usually lively and kind, looked hollow and distant. Her face was flushed, and there was a tension about her, like she was holding something back. Mary, trying to ease the awkwardness, accepted the croquettes with gratitude, but then Carmen hesitated, clutching the gift box a little tighter. After a few uncomfortable seconds of silence, she finally spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Mary, I need you to keep this for me, just for a little while," she said, avoiding eye contact. Puzzled, Mary asked, "What's in the box?" Carmen's cheeks burned bright red, and she let out a nervous chuckle. "It's embarrassing. Some personal items. I have guests coming over, and I really can't have them finding certain things." Mary was taken aback, but tried to remain polite. "Personal items?" she asked. Carmen looked down, her voice even softer now. "They're intimate items. You know, adult toys." She let out a shaky laugh, trying to mask her discomfort. At first, Mary thought Carmen was joking, but the nervous energy radiating from her neighbor suggested otherwise. The absurdity of the request left her stunned, but Carmen's embarrassment seemed genuine. Feeling sympathy for her clearly distressed friend, Mary nodded hesitantly. "Sure, I'll keep it safe for you." Carmen sighed with relief and practically thrust the box into Mary's arms before hurrying back across the street without another word. Mary watched her disappear into her home, puzzled by the entire exchange, but thinking little of it. After all, she reasoned, everyone has their private struggles, and if Carmen needed help with something that personal, who was she to judge? Mary placed the croquettes on the kitchen counter and carried the box into the hallway closet. She shoved it onto the top shelf, closed the door, and tried to forget about the bizarre interaction. Days passed, and Carmen never returned to reclaim her box. Weeks turned into months, and life continued as usual, except for the growing discomfort in the back of Mary's mind. The real nightmare began one evening when Mary noticed a foul, stomach-churning odor wafting through the house. It was faint at first, almost like rotting garbage or decaying meat, but it grew stronger with each passing day. She cleaned every corner of her home, scrubbing floors, taking out the trash, and even inspecting the drains. Yet the stench persisted and worsened. Eventually, the source of the smell became clear. It was coming from the hallway closet. With a sense of dread clawing at her chest, Mary opened the door and was immediately hit with a wave of putrid air so strong it made her gag. She scanned the closet's contents, her eyes landing on the forgotten box sitting on the top shelf. Mary hesitated. She remembered Carmen's embarrassed request and felt guilty about invading her privacy. But the unbearable odor left her no choice. She reached for the box, the smell intensifying with every inch closer. It was strangely heavy. Far too heavy for what Carmen had claimed was inside. Her hands shook as she brought it into the kitchen and set it on the floor. A sense of unease filled the room as she grabbed a pair of scissors and carefully cut through the wrapping paper. Beneath the decorative paper was another layer. This time, aluminum foil, tightly wrapped around something bulky and irregularly shaped. The smell intensified with every cut. Heart pounding in her chest, Mary peeled back the last of the foil, and then she saw it. Her scream tore through the silence of her home, a sound of pure primal terror. There, nestled inside the box, was something so horrifying it didn't seem real. A human head. The skin had taken on a sickly, mottled hue, the features barely recognizable under the grotesque effects of decomposition. The vacant eyes stared up at her, lifeless and haunting. Mary stumbled back, knocking over a chair. As she ran for the phone, her hands trembled violently as she dialed the emergency number. When the police arrived, they quickly secured the house and removed the gruesome evidence. It didn't take long for investigators to confirm the horrifying truth. The severed head belonged to Jesus Baranda, Carmen's boyfriend, reported missing months earlier. As detectives delved deeper into the case, the pieces of a macabre puzzle began to fall into place. Carmen, once seen as a kind neighbor and skilled cook, harbored a secret darker than anyone could have imagined. Evidence suggested that she had murdered Jesus in cold blood, dismembered his body with a saw, and boiled his head in an attempt to mask the smell of decay. But when that failed, she devised a chilling plan: hide the evidence in plain sight. Using Mary's sympathy against her, Carmen was arrested shortly after the discovery. During her trial, she showed little remorse, maintaining an eerie calm as the horrific details of her crime were laid bare. The investigation never uncovered what happened to the rest of Jesus's body, but one terrifying theory emerged, a possibility that made even the most seasoned detectives shudder. Some believed that Carmen, in a horrifying twist of cruelty, might have disposed of the remains in the most unthinkable way, by using them as ingredients in her infamous croquettes, served to unsuspecting neighbors, including Mary. The revelation of the severed head shattered the calm facade of the small Spanish town. News of the gruesome discovery spread like wildfire, and soon fear rippled through the once peaceful neighborhood. The thought that Carmen Marin, the sweet, friendly woman known for her culinary generosity, could commit such a monstrous crime felt impossible. But the evidence was undeniable. Police arrested Carmen the very next day. She was eerily calm as officers knocked on her door. No tears, no protests. She simply nodded when they informed her of the charges and quietly followed them into the patrol car, leaving behind the house, where her darkest secrets had lived for months. The investigation that followed peeled back the layers of a life far more sinister than anyone had imagined. Carmen was not the kind-hearted neighbor everyone believed her to be. She was manipulative, cold, and, as detectives would soon learn, disturbingly calculating. The police discovered traces of Jesus's blood throughout her house, including in the kitchen, the bathroom, and even under layers of fresh paint in her living room. It was clear this had not been a crime of passion. It had been planned. The autopsy on Jesus's head revealed terrifying details. His death had not been quick. There were signs of blunt force trauma before the beheading, suggesting he had been incapacitated first. But the most horrifying discovery was found in his jaw. Forensics revealed fragments of cloth jammed into his mouth, likely used to silence him during his final moments. The brutality of the murder shook the entire investigation team to their core. When interrogators confronted Carmen, she showed no signs of fear, guilt, or even sadness. She sat across from the detectives, with her hands folded neatly on the table, her expression cold and emotionless. When they asked why she had killed Jesus, she simply responded, "He betrayed me." Detectives were stunned by her detachment. Carmen claimed that Jesus had been planning to leave her for another woman, a betrayal she couldn't accept. But what followed wasn't just a crime born of heartbreak, it was something far more chilling. Carmen confessed to luring Jesus into her home under the guise of reconciliation. Once there, she served him dinner, his favorite meal, cooked by the woman he once trusted. It was during dessert that she attacked him. According to her own chilling admission, she struck him from behind with a heavy iron skillet, knocking him unconscious. What happened next was almost too horrifying to believe. Carmen didn't just kill Jesus. She mutilated his body in a calculated attempt to erase every trace of her crime. Using a saw, she severed his head from his body. But instead of disposing of the evidence immediately, she boiled his head in a large pot, trying to remove any lingering signs of decay. When the smell became unbearable, she wrapped the head in foil, placed it in a decorative box, and, this was the most horrifying part, delivered it to Mary under the guise of an embarrassing secret. And then came the darkest theory of all, the rumor that sent chills through the entire neighborhood. During the investigation, officers found traces of human tissue in Carmen's kitchen. It was in her meat grinder. They feared the unthinkable. Carmen may have used parts of Jesus' body in her cooking, specifically in her famous croquettes. Neighbors who had tasted her food felt physically ill just at the thought. The idea that they might have unknowingly consumed the remains of a murdered man was too horrific to comprehend. Carmen, however, never admitted to this accusation. She remained disturbingly silent on the matter, neither confirming nor denying the grisly speculation. But the evidence left behind in her kitchen suggested that the truth could be even more horrifying than anyone dared imagine. The trial became a national spectacle. People couldn't look away from the chilling details that surfaced daily in the courtroom. Carmen sat emotionless through every hearing, showing not a flicker of remorse as the prosecution laid out the gruesome details of her crime. Photos of the severed head, the blood-stained kitchen tiles, and the saw she had used were presented as evidence, each image more horrifying than the last. But what haunted the public most wasn't the murder itself. It was the idea that someone so seemingly normal, so integrated into her community, could be capable of such unimaginable cruelty. The friendly neighbor who had once shared meals, laughed with others, and offered kindness had harbored the heart of a monster all along. When the verdict was finally delivered, the courtroom was silent. Carmen Marin was found guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison, a sentence many believed was far too lenient for the horror she had inflicted. She showed no reaction as the sentence was read. No tears, no regret. Just the same icy composure she had maintained since the day of her arrest. But the nightmare didn't end with the verdict. The neighborhood was left haunted by lingering questions that would never be answered. What had truly driven Carmen to commit such an atrocity? Was it really just betrayal that fueled her rage? Or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface? And the most terrifying question of all, did Carmen truly use Jesus' remains in her cooking? The idea lingered in the minds of those who had once tasted her food. They couldn't escape the sickening possibility that they had unknowingly become part of the most horrifying crime their town had ever seen. In the aftermath of the trial, Mary never fully recovered from her involvement. She moved away from the neighborhood, unable to bear the memories tied to her home. Every time she tried to sleep, she remembered the smell of decay seeping from that innocent-looking box, and the moment she opened it, only to be met with a horror so profound it would haunt her forever. But perhaps the most unsettling legacy of this story isn't just the crime itself. It's the chilling realization that sometimes the most ordinary people are capable of the most unspeakable horrors. People who smile at you on the street, offer you food, or share a kind word, might be hiding something so dark, so twisted, that no one could ever imagine it until it's too late. And in this case, the gift of homemade food, a gesture of warmth and kindness, became the vessel for an unspeakable nightmare. A reminder that even the simplest act of trust can become a gateway to unimaginable terror. The dust had settled. Carmen Marin was locked away, her cold silence echoing through the prison walls. The case had officially been closed, but for those who lived through the horror, especially Mary, it would never truly end. The weight of what she had discovered lingered like a shadow over every part of her life. No matter how many times she tried to convince herself that it was over, every creak of the floorboards, every strange smell in her new home, every fleeting memory of Carmen's smile, it all clawed its way back into her mind. There was one question that haunted her more than any other. Why had Carmen chosen her? Out of all the neighbors, why had she been the one to receive that box? Was it simply convenience, a random choice, or was it something far more sinister? Mary couldn't help but wonder if Carmen had planned it all along. Had she sensed Mary's kindness, her unwillingness to say no, and used it as a weapon? Maybe Carmen had known that Mary would never question the request. Maybe she knew Mary wouldn't dare open that box. But the truth was far more terrifying, because what if it wasn't random? What if, on some level, Carmen had wanted her to find it, to be part of her twisted secret, to carry the burden of that horrifying discovery forever? It was a thought that kept Mary awake at night. The idea that she had been handpicked, chosen, to bear witness to a nightmare that no one else could understand. And that's the real horror of Carmen's crime. It wasn't just about murder. It was about control, about power, about forcing someone else to carry the weight of her darkness. But there was another layer to this nightmare. Something even more unsettling that reached far beyond Mary's personal torment. Because Carmen's crime didn't just live within the walls of her kitchen or the dark corners of her mind. It seeped into the very fabric of the community. The neighbors who had once gathered together for friendly meals now kept their distance from one another. The potluck stopped. The laughter that once echoed through the narrow streets fell silent. Every shared meal was now tainted by an unspeakable fear. What if they had eaten him? That question haunted them all. Though Carmen never confessed, the evidence was strong enough to make even the most skeptical believe the rumors. The human tissue found in her meat grinder wasn't something that could be ignored. People remembered the warm, crispy croquettes she had handed out so generously. Those delicious little morsels they had devoured without a second thought. Now, every bite they had taken seemed to crawl back up their throats like poison. But perhaps the darkest twist of all wasn't just the murder, or even the gruesome method of disposal. It was the realization that someone who seemed so ordinary could commit something so monstrously extraordinary. Carmen was not a stranger lurking in the shadows. She was a friendly neighbor, a beloved member of the community, someone who had been invited into their homes, trusted with their children, and welcomed at their dinner tables. And yet, behind that friendly smile had been something inhuman. Evil doesn't always wear a terrifying mask. Sometimes it hides behind warm eyes, friendly gestures, and the smell of home-cooked food. But as chilling as Carmen's case was, it wasn't just her crime that would live on in infamy. There was another layer, one that reached far beyond the small Spanish town where the nightmare unfolded. You see, Carmen's story, as grotesque as it was, inspired something that took on a life of its own. In The Way, the lyrics speak of two people embarking on a journey together, never realizing the road they're traveling is leading them towards something tragic. It reflects the same horrifying innocence that Mary experienced when she took that box from Carmen, completely unaware of the nightmare she was being handed. In the late 1990s, a band called Fastball released a song that carried a haunting echo of a real-life tragedy. The Way became a hit, praised for its catchy melody and nostalgic sound, but behind the music was something much darker. The Song was inspired by another unsettling disappearance. An elderly couple named Layla and Raymond Howard, who vanished on a road trip and were later found dead at the bottom of a ravine. They had become disoriented, likely due to declining mental health, and driven off the road without realizing the danger. But what connects that story to Carmen's horrifying tale is something deeper. It's the idea of trust, broken in the most unimaginable way. And maybe that's the true terror of stories like this. It's not the monsters we recognize that scare us. It's the ones we don't. The ones who live among us, hidden in plain sight, smiling as they pass us on the street. What if someone you trust is hiding a secret like Carmen's? The thought lingers, unspoken but ever present. And so, the question remains, how well do we really know the people around us? Your neighbor, your friend, even your family? Because sometimes the most terrifying horrors don't come from the shadows. They come from the people who seem the most familiar, the ones who knock on your door with a smile and a gift. Now, I want you to imagine being Mary. Imagine living with the knowledge that, for months, you had a secret of pure horror hidden in your home. Would you ever feel safe again? And if you think this story was disturbing, wait until you hear what's coming next. There's another case, one even stranger, even darker, that will make you question reality itself. If you're brave enough to continue this journey, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Because the next story, it might just be the most terrifying of them all. There's no official record of this case, but legends often have a grain of truth buried somewhere deep within. What do you think?